On be- Thank you. So, on behalf of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies at the Graduate Center CUNY, okay, so on behalf of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies at the Graduate Center CUNY, I am thrilled to welcome you all to this book salon in celebration of CLAGS's very own board member, Dr. Jess A. Goldberg's Jesse Goldberg's timely new book, Abolition Time, Grammars of Law, Poetics of Justice, published by University of Minnesota Press in 2024. If that wasn't all, we are also joined by two other amazing scholars slash activists slash writers slash teachers to help us do a deep dive into this important book and to make sense of the now of queer and trans studies and politics. Dr. Lavelle Ridley and Dr. M. Aziz, along with Dr. Goldberg, will invite us to consider how the project of prison abolition necessarily must consider the questions presented by the colonial gender binary and cis heteropatriarchy as an instance of what Goldberg calls a grammar of law. So my name is Deborah D. Biswas, and I am the co-chair of CLAGS's Board of Directors. I'm also an assistant professor of African American Studies at New York City College of Technology, City University of New York. I'm also the 2025-2026 Faculty Fellow at the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics at the Graduate Center CUNY. And Maddie will drop the rest in chat. So please, do click chat. Speaking of which, I want to give a shout out to Maddie Beaton, Communications Fellow at CLAGS and a doctoral student at in the Education Department here at the Graduate Center for all the behind the scenes labor she has put in to make this event possible. Thank you, Maddie. And many thanks to our ASL interpreters, Emilio and Marion Brown. Thank you both. This is CLAGS's 40th year, and we are still thriving despite being subjected to many, many austerity cuts. We are here because you wanted us to thrive and showered us with your love, friendship, and real material support. Now, by that I mean funding to help us keep bringing you cutting-edge scholarships, discussions, and workshops that help us, quote, ask better questions that do more than simply seek new rules, end quote, to borrow tonight's author, Jess Goldberg's description of her own praxis. So please donate what you can and help CLAG survive another 40 years and beyond. The donation link is in our website and in the chat. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers in the order in which they'll speak. For the purposes of time, I will share only a few lines from their bios, and Maddie will share the full bios of our illustrious guests in chat. Please make sure to read them. First up is Dr. Jess A. Goldberg. Goldberg is a community organizer in northeastern New Mexico, where they work as assistant professor of English and is the director of the Gender and Women's Studies program at New Mexico Highlands University. In addition to Abolition Time, she's co-editor with Marquise Bay of a special issue of GLQ on queer liberation and prison abolition titled Queer Fire. It's really great. And she's currently beginning a second book project titled Deputy Citizenship, White Supremacy and the Privatization of State Violence. Next, we will hear from Dr. Lavelle Ridley. Dr. Ridley is a Black, queer, transsexual feminist scholar and teacher who earned her PhD in English and Women's and Gender Studies from the University of Michigan. She is currently assistant professor of queer/trans aesthetic studies in the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the Ohio State University and at work on her first monograph, Imagining Freedom, Critical Trans Aesthetics Imagination in Black Trans Life Narratives. followed by Dr. M. Aziz. Dr. Aziz is a writer, community member, researcher, and safety instructor. They are a scholar of movement and movements hailing from the historically Black parts of South Jersey. Dr. Aziz is currently an assistant professor of African American Studies and Gender Studies at the University of Washington. A grandchild and student of the Black Power era, they believe we need a vast toolkit to get free, from gardening to de escalation skills to therapy. They advocate for this in their free community workshops and their public humanities project, Survival Pending Transformation. Welcome, Jess, Lavelle, and Mark. Jess, the virtual stage is yours.
Right. It is so lovely to be here, and I'll probably say a much more profuse thank you again later. Um, so I'm actually going to be really brief before being not brief at all at the end after my brilliant colleagues Lavelle Ridley and Emma Ziz offer some comments on Abolition Time. I'm going to start by simply reading one paragraph from the introduction of Abolition Time that um, grounds the work that the book is doing around gender. So this is from the introduction, and it is part of that part of the intro where we all of us who write these monographs kind of survey the scholarship we're drawing on, right? Throughout my close readings, I draw on Black feminist theory and queer studies to examine ways in which this uninterrupted persistence of juridical anti-Blackness manifests normative regimes of gender and sexuality as grammars of law. Hortense Spillers's foundational theorization of ungendering and its extension by scholars including C. Riley Snorton, Sarah Clark Kaplan, Marquise Bay, Patrice Douglas, and Sarah Haley make possible my analysis of how gender is not a pre-existing variable, but a contingent mode of being produced by and through racial sexual terror. Jennifer L. Morgan's foundational work theorizing the infamous partus sequitur ventrum law of slavery, and how Morgan's work is built on not only by Kaplan, but also by Alice Eve Weinbaum and Bridget Fielder, is of particular importance to my readings of not only gender, but also reproduction as both economic and biological formation. Though Abolition Time is not a comprehensive theory of gender, one of its persistent threads of analysis is examining how gender has not only been delimited by, but also has been mobilized as a particularly insidious and violent grammar of law that seeks to narrow the horizon of liberation within the colonially imposed scope of Western binaries. I know there are a couple of students who are on this chat who took feminist theory with me this semester. That's half of what the syllabus was about. So I'm gonna say more later after hearing from Dr. Ridley and Dr. Aziz, but that was just a little something to kind of frame us for the beginning. And again, thank you all those of you who are here, and thank you, Dr. Ridley and Dr. Aziz, for being in conversation. And I'll go ahead and mute.
All right. Thank you, Jess, and also, to echo the praise and gratitude to CLACS for sponsoring this, and I'm just overly excited and grateful for the opportunity to be in conversation with both two good friends of mine and two brilliant scholars, and also just grateful in general, and sometimes the way that the academic institution allows for nice things to happen sometimes, occasionally, rarely, whatever. I'm really grateful to do this because it gave me the chance to get to sit with a really good book, and to learn and think deeply with Jess and all of the folks that you're citing and in deep conversation with about abolition, about teaching and close reading. So this was just a real joy for me to be able to get to have that. I wanted to just like quickly begin my remarks with just like a quick like little anecdote to illustrate some things from the book that I think are important as well to get to what I think is one of its like highlights and best offerings to us as readers. So something, and I was just talking with Jess about it a second ago as we were getting set up. Every Monday consistently, there's a on Instagram. on social media. There's an Instagram page by this wonderful professor here somewhere in Ohio. I think Ohio Dominican is the name of the university, but he's a medievalist. His handle is Medievalist Matt, I believe. And every Monday he always will post like on a scale of 1 to 9, how much of a medieval, I think today it was like porcupine or hedgehog or something. Like, how are you today? And then it has images from like different medieval manuscripts, and it's really silly and cute or whatever. But it's a really cute, consistent ritual that Jess and I have started to develop online. Because Jess is the one person who will consistently respond and always tell me kind of how they're feeling today, like what kind of medieval mermaid are you or whatnot. So it's really fun, and what I appreciate about that, not only the consistent ritual of it, the activity of going to share and laugh and all that, is that it makes Jess a consistent friend on my algorithm. So I get to see their stories and what they post online pretty frequently because of that interaction that we always have. And that in itself is a really enlightening treat for me because it means that I get to see the many, many pictures and snapshots that they take of teaching and what being in the classroom is like for them. I have a number of, of saved photos, of a couple of chalkboard, lessons about Morrison, or about Zong or Citizen, by Claudia Rankine that I'm like, that's too good. I can't not, I gotta save that. But it really kind of shows and illustrates for me how not only brilliant of a teacher that Jess is and how committed they are, but the way that all of these elements of the job that we do as writers, as scholars, or whatever, come together through the nexus of teaching and learning and being in the space with our students and with other people. So a brilliant teaching, approach to teaching as well as a really beautiful book, just some general impressions. It's really clear and beautiful writing. I really love the synthesis of ideas and the examples that Jess draws on in the text, and all the people that they're in conversation with. I particularly noticed as I was reading that I haven't read all of the primary sources that are the case studies or the highlights through each of the different chapters in the book, but the examples and the writing around the different scenes and moments that the book deals with for the arguments it's trying to make were really clear and not only made me really want to go read those texts at some point to put them on my list, but it kind of engaged a kind of familiarity with the text that I think as I kept reading, I realized really comes from and kind of maybe can only come from engaging with the text so consistently through the course of teaching and teaching different kinds of classes, different modes of teaching, different levels, and all that. So again, the importance of teaching and of pedagogy in this book, I thought, is really, really, really clear and succinct throughout, and it's really delightful. Something I write in the notes and the margins of a lot of different places is that speaking of delightful, is that it's delightfully repetitive in that the ways in which Jess is describing and defining the poetics, the different ways that poetics of justice function throughout the text, the teaching lessons, the visual representations of what they're calling the excessive present, which I love that phrase, and what it allows us to do theoretically, are all like really, really illuminating highlights of what the book's trying to do. So that repetition about the poetics and how they're functioning, I think are all really consistent through lines through, the argument that's being made about this wider, creative and political project that's abolition, that's abolitionist close reading that they're advancing here. Which I think is all really, just brilliant scholarship, just, to be my own kind of repetitive. Um, Something regarding method, particularly that I am drawn to in my reading, and I'm sure any other reader might be who's interested in abolition, is I'm really drawn to the way that through all the different chapters, through different registers of the laws of grammar or the poetics of justice that are being discussed, the way that abolitions specifically. And I love the way that the different definitions, because like as Ruth Wilson Gilmore tells us, there's not just one abolition, but many kinds of them. just finds different ways to not only articulate the abolitionist bent of a text or what the author intends or not, but particularly is always focusing on the imaginative and the creative, to reference Hartman, the fabulative elements of those abolitionist projects and how central they are to that. So, and also to the broader kind of radical world-making projects that the texts are engaging in, and that they engage with their students in the classroom. I find that all really not only relevant and smart, but it resonates a lot with my own work, and the kind of methodological approach I take to my own archive of texts, working on Black trans women's life writing and thinking about the critical, creative, imaginative elements that come through that particular body of work and what those particular kinds of people are trying to advance through that writing. So I was really happy to see that this book is not only a great resource in terms of thinking about abolition and African American literary studies, but also a good example of how to think broadly and creatively about these things that can be really heavy, and have a lot of weight to them. Even in moments where there were some really clever and creative ways to interpret scenes or deal with responses from students, there was always, in the course of reading, a kind of heaviness too that, of course, attends the feeling of either remembering, reading these texts for the first time yourself, or what it's like teaching them, or being in the classroom with them, or even watching like a film adaptation of them and things like that. The book is able to go between many different affective registers, which I think is another really big strength of abolition time and what it's able to do. Um, I also wanted to mention, to narrow in on one aspect of it, the book's focus on temporality, so the way that time structures the abolitionist project, as well as the kind of ongoingness of a lot of the forms of violence that just continue to haunt all of us collectively. I definitely like to want to join the chorus of folks who have a particular disdain and hate for the Enlightenment slash Age of Reason's imposition of these very firm and sedimented ontological and epistemological divisions of that there's this and there's that, and that one thing is better, and they're always structured in that way. There's a before and an after. The constant reference that Jess makes in the book to what they call the juridical event. So the idea that something harm happens and then the state or the law can come in and ameliorate that through mitigation or punishment, and then that's that. I'm a very big hater of the way that time in history, for many, many reasons, set us on the course of like this capital M modernity, or this capital W world, that Jess mentions throughout the book. Often that, structures on is the cause for a lot of the things that abolition time, as they're arguing, we need to combat and dismantle those things. So just really excellent and fascinating thinking about temporality and time and the division, the discrete division of things, and the idea, the imposed idea that that's the fixed natural way of that things have to go. This idea of I mentioned a second ago, of the excessive present, particularly, is a really useful temporal understanding. And already, return to the idea of teaching, I already know is going to be a really useful thing for me in the classroom. It's going to help me explain in a more concrete way, but by also kind of, thinking about the ethos of a, established scholar, in the field and in these interdisciplines, as a way to both disavow the imposition of what the Enlightenment forms of thinking sediment in us so often, that it can be so hard to get through them, or all the exercises of grief or mourning or whatnot that come with sitting with these texts or these conversations in the classroom or other spaces. But just this idea of having a sense of connection, a sense of ongoingness, and something that's just a lot more active and not as, lazy, or as just not as elastic or as flexible, that we need to understand something as uh, as egregious and violating and again ongoing as everything that's inaugurated by the Middle Passage and the Enlightenment, everything that kind of all swirls together. The thing I just last read in the book was the part towards the end, I think in chapter 4, where Jess talks about the whirlpool as a natural metaphor for there is no discrete that and this. It's all swirling together all at the same time. In one of the poems, I think that they're close reading. So yeah, I think it's a brilliant way to think through that, and particularly that brings me back to kind of my central aspect of what makes this book really shine for me is that I think my favorite thing about this, I would say, this whole book is that I think it's going to make me a better teacher, and it's going to make me help me show up better in the classroom, think more expansively about what's in front of me and the students to do for that semester, and to listen to them and really come up with some impactful ways of actually engaging in the project, the abolitionist project that often, we like to attend the works that we're doing in the classroom when we can. So that's kind of my big takeaway. And then quickly I'll say, really clear and brilliant inter interlocutors from Black feminist, queer, and trans studies. I think that just does a really great job of making this book, and there's moments where they'll kind of gesture towards like, I'm not talking as much about or unpacking as widely or as broadly as what a book that is in, for example, queer of color critique or a Black trans studies or anything like that might do, but still giving enough reference to both citationally and theoretically to the thinkers and the scholars who shaped the theories around gender embodiment and all that we need in order to come to the kinds of Afro-pessimist, Afro-imaginative, and other kinds of queer utopian forms of thinking and being that are so central to the book and where we go from there. So just a really great engagement. Um, with just like a minute or so left before I pass it over to Dr. Aziz, I wanted to read just a part of a quote from the text that I think really shows off what the book's doing really, really, really well. So in the first chapter on page 51, the first chapter is the chapter on accumulation, where Jess is thinking most essentially with Claudia Rankine's Citizen and American Lyric. There is a part on page 51 where Jess is thinking about the connection between the ongoingness of both slavery, the Middle Passage, and then this supposed afterlife of slavery, and how that connects intimately to the PIC, the Prison Industrial Complex. So Jess writes this. Incarcerated people may not labor in the same way as the enslaved, even as the 13th Amendment retains its infamous exception clause. But incarcerated people do become, as Angela Davis puts it, the detritus of contemporary capitalism. It is in the process of being produced as excess, as waste, and ultimately as disposable population that the incarcerated are positioned as continuous with the enslaved. It is disposability and not labor extraction that is the strongest thread of connection between slavery and the PIC. Citizen, then, even without ever explicitly mentioning prison abolition and its invocation of the history of slavery and its afterlives, is a text that resonates with contemporary abolitionist thought, whether Rankin intends so or not. End quote. So I think that that quote just right there as an overarching abolitionist project really clearly encapsulates, I think, two central things that Jess is doing. One, the imaginative way to conceive of abolition, here particularly where it's disposability and temporality. That's the side of exploitation, or the focus of it here, rather than labor and embodiment, as other folks have noted in other texts and similar texts. And then finally, a close reading methodology that works with both the poetics of the text itself, but while not necessarily centering the implied intentions of the author. So there's a wide scope of possibility I think that this book offers us in the classroom, outside the classroom, in our office, in the park, out in the world. So, like I said, I'm excited to be a better teacher, having sat with this book, and again, just grateful for the opportunity to do so. So, um, I'm gonna pass it over to Professor Aziz if you're ready.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to Dr. Goldberg for asking me to join today, and thank you to the Center for LGBTQ Studies and Dr. Biswas, and thank you to someone whose work I also love dearly, Dr. Ridley. I ask for a little bit of patience today from everyone. I'm grieving the recent loss of a dear companion from this morning, but this is the one space that I didn't cancel. So I finished the remarks in the process of mourning, but hopefully there are some things here that can be offered for our food of thought. So happy to be here. On page 27 of the introduction to Abolition Time, Dr. Goldberg, in the lineage of Dr. Christina Sharp, writes, "We hear the echoes in the name of Garner from Margaret to Eric. We hear the echoes in the name from Margaret to Eric. We hear the echoes, we hear the echoes." These echoes help us to understand Goldberg's abolition time and abolition time itself, a temporality that extends to after the end of the world. Dr. Goldberg offers us an understanding of different canonical works of African American literature, like Beloved, that are not fixed on the abject or the object of loss, nor are they fixed without a call for something more. Using an abolitionist literary reading, as Dr. Goldberg suggests, allows us to understand that crucial texts in the African American literary canon are often calling for the possibility of a justice yet to come. A justice that extends transhistorically from Margaret Garner, who inspired the story in Toni Morrison's Beloved. Garner, who escaped, if only from a time, from the horrors of slavery that scholars have done their best to name, but we know ultimately are unknowable. And in her escapes, Margaret made the conscious and perhaps sane decision to relieve one of her children of this world rather than have them experience the life that she knew. In taking her child's final breaths, rather than her child's final breaths being taken by captivity, Garner, as a fugitive, was certainly what Black Power revolutionary and thinker George Jackson might have called free for a while. There was something about this breath that Dr. Goldberg keeps bringing us back to. Black breath is not singular, nor is abolition. So then what can the literary canon do if not remind us that there is an afterlife of enslavement, of Reconstruction, of the nadir, of the Renaissances, of the long hot summers, of Greenhaven, San Quentin, and Attica, of Reaganomics, of hyper-incarceration, of blues, hip-hop, and jazz? And what will we do in these afterlives? And what will abolition bring us in or outside of literary close reading? The dictionary definition of abolition is the formal legal act of doing away with, destroying, or ending a system, practice, or institution, such as slavery, capital, punishment, or unjust laws. But for our sake, we're not only thinking in terms of the formal and the legal. So then what then is an abolitionist reading practice? Dr. Goldberg reminds us through Abolition Time that scholarship in and of itself is not the work with a capital W. But just as with many things, scholarship conditions us to be in this world, and it can condition us to be in this world and accept it and its racialized and gendered violences. But we can use reading to inform our freedom dreams, in a la Robin D.G. Kelley, and our world building, and our approach to time in the past, present, and future. In the classroom, whether in the 9th grade room or the sophomore year of college, there are risks that come with teaching African American literature, especially in the era in which state governments are attempting to fully eradicate it from curriculum. Of those risks, we importantly risk the field being seen as a form of cultural competence, or as Dr. Goldberg reminds us, as reservoirs of social data, a sort of crash course in the neighbor. But as writers Toni Morrison and Harriet Jacobs demanded, we can demand more of ourselves and of others while they are audience to African American literature. For as Dr. Goldberg says, abolition work is choral. If abolition requires us to mitigate and eliminate on the ground incarceration, policing, and provide access to safe and attainable housing, safety, food, and justice for us all, as so many organizers like Miriam Kaba tell us is possible, abolition must too require a basic unlearning. It requires everyone, from the participants in this Zoom to the beat officer on the street, taking the last breath of someone else, to hear, learn, and think differently, and perhaps in ways that we think are impossible. What if the officer that took Eric Garner's life in 2014 in New York City via a chokehold could think and hear an abolition? Would he be a police officer at all? And would he listen when someone says, as Eric Garner did with his final words, "I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you last time, please just leave me alone. Please, please don't touch me. Do not touch me. I can't breathe." Abolition Time helpfully connects Eric Garner and his daughter Erica Garner, and his echo and her echo, to Margaret Garner and her children and their echoes. It connects them all through the power of who can take breath. Where some audiences struggle to understand Morthin Sethe, the Margaret Garner character in Beloved, and her insistence on taking her child's last breath, do those same audiences struggle when it comes to Eric Garner? Do they see Garner and his humanity and his right to breath, or do they struggle to move beyond excusing the officer? If abolition is indeed not a metaphor, if it is a method of living and acting and thinking, we must learn to think about what almost feels impossible now. Reflecting back on the Black arts movement of the 1960s and 1970s, writer Haki Matabuki wrote, "We sought fresh air." His words are often some of my favorites that I read with students when I teach about the Black arts movement. It reminds me that the desire for breath and fresh air indeed exceed our understanding of time as well as gender. But as in so many things that they uttered, a generation of activists during the 60s and 70s were both taken very seriously and seen very dangerously. They were witnessed by millions around the world who were appalled by them and by some who stood with them. But as Dr. Goldberg notes, the act of witnessing has never been enough. For if it were, the footage of Daniel Pantaleo murdering Eric Garner on camera would have helped us dismantle the modern police state as we know it. His daughter Erica Garner spent the rest of her life fighting against the police state, until she herself passed away when her heart stopped beating and breathing due to some of the chronic health issues that are affecting everyday Black folks. So from Eric to Erica to Margaret, we must think and write as if we take their breath seriously, as if the collective, non-individual breath of Black life also has an afterlife. Scholar Ruth Gilmore, one of Goldberg's interlocutors, reminds us that racism can be defined as, quote, "the state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to premature death." So then abolition calls for a complete and total end to this phenomenon of racialized, gendered premature death and all the places it occurs. Abolition Time nor abolitionist literary studies will do justice to Black stolen lives in a vacuum, as Dr. Goldberg herself writes. But it helps us think, like Erica Garner, about a dissatisfaction with, quote unquote, waiting for a future to come, and calls us to the idea of a, quote, radical imagining of resurrection, of putting breath back into the body, and the radical practice of refusal, end quote. We cannot bring back Erica, Margaret, and Eric, but we can, in Dr. Goldberg's word, keep those spaces in the white supremacist violence ledger blank, the spaces that are waiting for other names. And again, that requires us to think differently, to think the impossible. Dr. Goldberg, after close reading texts familiar and less so, leaves us with the words of poet Kemi Alabi, quote, maybe the best political poems are blockages, strikes, protests, mutual, cities on fire. Maybe direct action is a poetic form. Dr. Goldberg is quick to note that her work does not do the same work as direct action or poetry that is direct action, whether or not that's true. But radical reading and learning and teaching is a practice that is accessible across gender identity. Here I'm reminded of poet Amiri Baraka, who has a much different racialized gender than both Alabi and Goldberg, and his controversial poem, but beautifully written, Black Art, where he too said, we want poems that kill, assassin poems, poems that shoot guns, poems that wrestle cops in alleyways and take their weapons. His words, like theirs, alarm the unskilled reader who fears the Black poet more than they fear the officer that killed Eric Garner, more than the white man enslaver who hunted Margaret Garner and her children, and her partner. But that is why an abolitionist literary reading is important, and is important for us to teach. Just as Dr. Goldberg reminds us, making the new world begins with thinking about a new world and understanding the choices that both literary and historical agents made in attempts to get there. If we teach texts like Beloved as something that captures a past event that we are removed from, we cannot hope to explain to students why Miriam Kaba wrote, yes, we literally mean abolish the police. If reading literature is not itself one node of capturing potential co-conspirators, then we risk losing more time, trapped in the grammars of law and not in the poetics of justice. So to conclude, as someone who writes about the long history of police chokeholds, anti-Blackness, and abolition, I want to be in cahoots with Dr. Goldberg. For decades before Eric Garner and George Floyd's murders in 2014 and 2020, police precincts across the country, from Los Angeles to New York, wrote policies about how and when chokeholds could be used, with many police departments marking them as illegal in the first place. So then we must read like Dr. Goldberg does, because if we do not think and read in this way, we will not be prepared for the conversations about futurity to come. Thank you.
Thank you both, Lavelle, Dr. Ridley, and Dr. Aziz. Thank you both so much for those offerings. I am so glad to be invited to be in cahoots by your comments, Dr. Aziz. Always striving to figure out what kind of praxis is necessary to be a not an ally, but a comrade, a co-conspirator, to be in cahoots. To be in cahoots, I think, is to dispel of any fantasies of doing for and all those fantasies and move into doing with. So that language of cahoots is resonating. What I'm gonna do is I am going to set a timer for myself, seeing that we have about 19 minutes before our event comes to a close. I'm going to give myself about 8 minutes, but I'm going to try to take less than that to respond to some of the things that were offered here. Um, and I think just thinking organically backwards from what Dr. Aziz just offered, um, I'm thinking a lot about fear and disruption and what it means to be an unskilled reader who is more afraid of Amiri Baraka's poem than the police violence that inaugurates the occasion for it. What it means to be more afraid of the protest against police violence than the continuous, without the grammar of the period, the continuous murderous logic of police violence, which Dylan Rodriguez tells us is a misnomer because all policing is violence. Um, uh, and thinking about the rhetorical necessity for those of us who are in the pro-Palestine movement to condemn Hamas every time we condemn what Israel is doing, as if we need to be as angry at people who are escaping genocide as we do at the genociders. Um, right? This way of false equivalence. Um, and I think that one of the things um, as your comments are, I think both of your comments actually, both Dr. Aziz and Dr. Ridley's comments are making me think about like what thinking is in the book that isn't surfaced yet. I've been thinking a lot. I've been doing a lot of events these last few months about abolition time, talking at universities, reading from it. And I'm realizing how much thinking is in that book that is still coming to fruition now in ways that aren't fully formed on the page. And I think I want to maybe for the next 5 minutes talk about two of those things. And this is all very organically, right? Like I'm kind of coming to it as I'm talking out loud mid-sentence. But I think there's two things I want to talk about for the next 5 minutes. And those two things are um, part of abolition time is becoming a better reader of violence. Um, and I want to say something very serious about that. And part of abolition time um, is more of a theory of gender than I think I was allowing myself to say it was on the actual pages of the book. And I think I'll go in that order that I just said them. Um, so what I mean by part of what abolition time is doing is helping us be, I am going to use your language, Dr. Aziz, unskilled versus skilled, become more skilled readers of violence. It is a perversion of a magnitude I can't capture that one of the many afterlives of slavery that we live in is a fear and condemnation of the slave revolt that is greater than the fear and condemnation of slavery. Um, there's a longer argument to be made about how, for example, stop and frisk policy, which is most famously asserted with the New York Police Department. I grew up in New York, so I'm constantly thinking about the NYPD, although the NYPD is simply very famous, but not necessarily at all unique. But the way in which stop and frisk policy, which is this idea of being able to stop someone on the street and frisk them to search for weapons and such, is itself a manifestation of the fear of the slave revolt. It is a way of, if there's too many Black people in a street corner of New York City, that's scary. And so the police will control that. And part of what I think Abolition Time is doing is trying to undo Dr. Ridley, I'm turning my page in my notes to get to the way you put this. I think you said that modernity itself is kind of this inauguration of these very definitive separations that the Enlightenment gives us, and how you hate that. And I also hate that. We hate the Enlightenment's imposition. Your word imposition really sits with me. The imposition of these hard separations. I wrote down while you were speaking, Dr. Ridley, the sentence, modernity itself is the naturalization of hierarchy and division. Modernity is the naturalization of hierarchy and division, meaning these things that are not natural, are not like, do not have to be, become settled. And so what abolition time, I think, is doing a lot of is this unsettling of what modernity would prefer to be settled. And one of the things that it's unsettling is, I think, this conceptualization of the disruptive other as that which needs to be ordered, right? Everyone can picture the Law and Order logo on your on your like imagination as I say that, right? Um, and so this is where I think I've been finding, and only recently I'm finding the ability to articulate more the way queer and trans studies um, offers formulations that rhyme with, in a different key, formulations that I became more comfortable earlier with in Black studies, which is thinking about the ways in which capital C civilization, capital M modernity are projects of bringing to heel and ordering disruptive force. And I'm thinking about C. Riley Snorton's work on what is worded as, I believe, the appositionality, not oppositionality, but appositionality of anti-Blackness and anti-transness in Black on Both Sides. And I think that one of the things that the Black radical tradition does, I'm thinking about Cedric Robinson's famous quip that Black studies is the critique of Western civilization, right? Which I love is like a one-line definition of what is Black studies. And I'm thinking of trans antagonistic violence as an assertion of a binary order onto bodies that disrupt that order simply by appearing in the world. Um, and that one of the things that Abolition Time is after, in all of its close reading of poetry, of plays, of novels, in its annoyingly tight attention to spending an entire page talking about the space between sentences in a Morrison novel. Um, and that very highly disciplined attention that I bring to literary texts is aimed at looking these deadly forces in the face, seeing that if we're going to refuse, we need to try to grapple with and understand that which we are trying to refuse, in order to open up the possibility of thinking and doing differently. So that way the disruption that was already happening, because the law has never actually won. The law never did have the final word. It never will have the final word. That the disruption that was always happening can be released from those forces that would rather write so many of our names in white supremacy's death ledger. And so for me, abolitionist work is helping us become more skilled readers of how violence functions, how gender functions as an ordering of us, and how we can allow the disruption that we're already doing to have more space and more breathability. And I think that the practice of close reading and all of that attention, that paying attention, that staying with, helps us get there. So I'll leave my comments there, and we only have about 10 minutes left to open up.
All right, that is fire. Thank you so much. We have a question in chat. Smaran is asking, what would you see as the inverse of abolition time? What is it chafing against and resisting? Modernity's temporality, carceral temporality. Could you say more about your conceptualization of abolition versus carceral time?
Yeah, I think that when I'm theorizing abolition time in the excessive present, I am moving against the juridical event. So quick and dirty on that is, and Dr. Ridley already invoked this term in her comments, the idea that a bad thing happens, some bad thing happens, and so the law says that when that bad thing happens, someone steals something from me, for instance. Um, uh, it is the job of the law, the court, to come in, evaluate facts, decide that the event of something bad happening is done, and now we will move into the doing justice. And in the doing justice process, we'll figure out what remedy to do, and we will harm the person who harmed you, and in harming the harmer, we will arrive at the end of justice being served. And so I would call that the juridical event. I think that is that's the 60-second version of what Abolition Time, kind of more extending prose, describes as the way that capital W, so-called Western political theory, offers some kind of account of justice. Abolition Time says justice is not something that we arrive at. It is not an event. It is a process. It is a practice. It is a making right of community. So that's what I would say to that question in the chat.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you all have any questions for each other?
I do actually have a question for you, Jess, for Dr. Goldberg. And part of my question is about when you talk about in your chapters on breath and the different sort of, because you give us 4 different sort of modalities in the book to think about abolition time and literary studies. And I think you talk about breath as the one that is the hardest to grasp for you. So I was wondering if you would talk more about that and why it's the hardest to grasp out of the sort of framework. And you might have to tell, I guess, the folks here, they haven't read the book, what the framework is. But
Thank you so much for that question. So the book kind of does a thing where it's like, there are poetics of justice, and I'm going to give you 4 examples. And so those examples become, chapter 1 is poetics of accumulation. Chapter 2 is poetics of perforation. Chapter 3 is poetics of witnessing. And chapter 4 is poetics of breath. And accumulation, perforation, and witnessing, I think, are things that I can point to in a poem and be like, this is where the poem is doing accumulation, or this is where the play is dramatizing witnessing. This is where the poem is perforating its own archive. The chapter on breath is, there's what I eventually somewhat arrive at is that what I'm thinking about in the chapter on the poetics of breath is the way that there are these texts in the Black Atlantic literary traditions that offer this hyper-realist attention to anti-Black violence. And I'm thinking, so in that chapter, I read a play about lynching, and I read a poem about a slave massacre on board a ship in the Atlantic. And both of those texts are hyper-realist about representing violence. And the play makes violence happen off stage mostly, and the poem actually really graphically represents some very uncomfortable forms of violence. So I would say content warning, but if you're going to read a book about the history of slavery, content warnings for every chapter. So I know that what I'm thinking about in chapter 4 is something about the way literary texts in the Black Atlantic literary traditions, plural, offer these realist representations of violence, and yet also gesture towards, or sometimes full-throatedly posit, an imaginative, completely non-realist demand for a life lived differently. And so I think about it as Christina Sharp's demand to put breath back into the Black body. I think about it in terms of Harriet Jacobs's call in her 19th century texts, her observation of like wanting a space to breathe. And that like the demand of a lot of these texts that I'm reading is something that is literally impossible. We cannot bring the dead back to life. We actually can't, like as an abolitionist organizer outside of a scholar in the book, I can't do justice to Eric Garner's death. He's dead. There is no, his daughter is dead. There's no bringing Eric and Erica back. That justice will not be done by any work we do. And so there's an impossibility that like abolition, like what abolition wants is the impossible. But if what abolition wants is the impossible, then our obligation to doing the work is unending. And that, I think, is what breath is trying to teach me as I'm struggling with it and what I'm trying to offer others. That a poetics of breath is making breathing possible in a world that constantly steals it. And there's something in that as I arrive at that formulation. Uh, Dr. Ridley, I wanted, and I know we only have 5 minutes, but there were multiple times in your comments where you talked about the creativity of the abolitionist project and the creativity of reading. And I know your work in the way that you read uh, self-authored writings. Um, uh, there's a way in which, like, first glance, autobiography is not the creative stuff because that's just real life that happened. And I just kind of wanted to invite you to say more about how creativity is important, how you see it as important to abolitionist work, and maybe where abolitionist work and literary studies meet.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be so happy to. I mean, yeah, and especially that you located that like initial denial and like self-authored texts and memoirs and life writing are often in terms of genre just kind of again imposed into a discrete genre convention or norms where it's like this is just history, like this is just a thing that's just that can be read in these very normative kind of ways. So I love that question, and particularly as connection to abolition. I mean, I always say in different, places where I speak, for me, the like becoming an abolitionist clicked and made the most sense, particularly when I heard Angela Davis say it for like the umpteenth time at like an NWSA or something at their conference that, the key to abolition is imagining a world that doesn't need prisons. So it's not just a world without them, a world that does not need them. And I think that paying attention to that particular that particular relationship, that dialectic between the material of the world and what is necessary for that world to be, all come together really like, poetically through a variety of kinds of works too. And also too, I would say like as like a life writing studies scholar, memoirs and life writing are no more true than the, capital H history that we read. Everyone has the ability to lie or forget or fudge the truth or misremember or anything like that. So, and again, like what I said in my remarks about the how you capture that creative, imaginative aspect so well is, thinking about Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulation, a lot of Kara Keeling's work, who you cite Keeling as well, offers ways to think outside of not only how to do our work in our traditional methodological approaches, but how we can ask altogether different kinds of questions, how we could approach these issues from altogether different kinds of ways. So like, I always start my bio like, as was read earlier, by Professor Biswas with, I'm a Black, queer, transsexual woman, as well as someone who has a PhD and does his work in whatever, because it often upends a logic that often doesn't come with those things being next to each other. Um, so yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you all so much. You have given us so much to think about. This is the time of the interregnum, but here we are rehearsing freedom and freedom dreaming with all of you. Thank you, Jess, for this wonderful book, and thank you, Lavelle and Mar, for your amazing, engagement with this book. And thank you all for joining us today. Hope to see you soon. We have a wonderful event coming up, Jose Munoz Award event, and we will be awarding. We will be celebrating Queen Jean's work, her work with Black Trans Liberation Kitchen, and so much. So hope to see you on June 15th, either in person or online. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day and keep rehearsing freedom. Thank you. It's abolition time.